Welcome back to JP's Budget Collecting and our weekly look back at the hot comics from 6 months ago. This week we're looking back at the hot comics from February 25th, 2022, and I'm recording this on August 26th, 2022. As always, I give those dates so you guys know when this is actually relevant information, because the market is always moving and changing. As always, we're also looking back at the CBSI Hot Top 10 and the Comic Tom Key Collector Hottest Trending Comics of the Week. Those are the two lists I use for this look back. They give you a good feel of what was hot that particular week in terms of raw comics and that kind of, and slabs for that matter, because you get a little bit of both. As always, what we're doing here, though, is to try to see what factors made those books hot back then and what has sustained or caused them to drop back. What has affected them since, so that we all make better decisions when we're making the hot book, chasing those hot books of the moment. And maybe we learn a little bit of patience, because if you've been watching these videos for a while now, you will know that at least in 2022, the vast majority of books are dropping within 6 months, that if you're a little patient, you can get better deals. So let's see if that'll hold again this week. First up, we have Zero, number 1. This hit the list because news came out that this was being made. This was an option project that was going to be produced by 50 Cent, and everybody was going crazy. So this $2 book became a $60 to $100 book, with a high sale of a raw copy of $180. And I took a lot of flack because back there on the look back, I called this a dumpster fire, that this was silly just because 50 Cent was producing it. If you didn't care about the character, why would you pay this? And now it's a $10 to $30 book, which is a little more typical price for something that just gets optioned. And yeah, but that's still a massive dumpster fire from what the prices were just 6 months ago. Definitely a book that has been worth being patient on and waiting on. Next, more option-related books. This is I Am Legend, number 1. We got news that this was going to be in production for an HBO Max TV show or movie. Wasn't 100% sure which way this was going to go. Back then, it only jumped up to a $10 book. Much more reasonable for an option news jump than our last one. But this still is a $1 to $5 book now with very few sales. Also a trap at less than half of what it was going for back then. And really, with all the craziness at HBO and Warner Brothers and Discovery right now, who knows if this is even going to get made at this point. So, next, our last option-related book is Wild Cards, number 1. We got news that Marvel was adapting the first novel as a comic. Supposedly, they were working on an adaptation as maybe a show as well, that George R.R. Martin was involved as the original writer of the novel. Just more projects for him, which means he's never finishing the Game of Thrones books. But anyway, it caused this to jump all the way up to a $20 book, 9.4 going up to 100. And now it's a $5 to $15 book, another kind of trap, another book that dropped way back. Most of these are going for under $10, or you can get like the whole wild card set for $15, $20. So definitely another book that has dropped back. With that, we're going to move into covers, and we had a ton of covers this week to talk about. First up is Invincible number 2. This is the Tyler Kirkham Adam Eve variant. Another one of those whatnot variants that were coming out back then for Invincible books. Back then, a raw copy of the trade dress was going for $400 plus. Now it's a $125 to $220 book, which is still a ton for a reprint, new cover, several years later, but still a ton of money, but nowhere near that $400. 9.8, you're going for $250, $300, also well less. This is marginally a dumpster fire, but yeah, I put it in the trap range just because there are sales still going for fairly high. But yeah, this is definitely a book that has not, if you jumped on the initial hype, I mean, the book is still worth a ton of money, just not the craziness when it first came out, which has been the case with all of these whatnot Invincible books. Next, we got Timeless number 1. This is a second print, 1 in 50 of Miss Minutes, with Miss Minutes on the cover. So this is basically the black and white version of that Miss Minutes cover. Back then, raw copies were going for $130 on this thing. A reminder that she does not actually appear in this book, except on this cover. Now it's a raw copies are 70 to 90, 9.8, 1 to 150. So yeah, another trap. We were started off this list this week not with very good performance. Still a lot of money. 70 to 90 for a 1 in 50. That's not that bad. Still going for almost double, but just nowhere near the almost triple it was back then of ratio. More second prints. We actually got 3 in a row. This is the second one. This is Thor number 20, the second print. Nick Klein cover, 1 in 25 of the second print, with the reveal of the God of Hammers. Raw copies back then were going for 100. Now 100 plus. Now raw copy will cost you 30 to 65. 9.8 will cost you 70 to 150. Another trap. Another book that has not sustained those kind of high values we got at the beginning. So far, the God of Hammers hasn't amounted to much. We'll see. Kate sometimes plays a little longer game, but yeah, so far this hasn't really paid off. Kind of like the Black Winter books that Kate's did with Thor. Next, our last second print incentive that we're going to talk about is Star Wars Crimson Reign number 1. This is the Steve Cummings 1 in 25 second print. This one was going for $55.60. And yeah, now it's the only sale recently was a 9.8, went for $190. All the asking prices on raw copies of this are around $100, and there's just no one buying them. So it's really hard to judge this. I put this as a down, and I'll be back. I guess it's not really an I'll be back because you can't really get it for a reasonable price because people are asking crazy, but nobody's paying it. So eventually, someone who's trying to sell this is going to come down to a price that people are willing to pay. And my guess is it's going to be at or below those prices back then. But it's hard to tell. They're asking more than that, but nobody's buying. So we'll see what comes of this particular book. With that, our next cover, and finally out of the second print, is Miles Morales Spider-Man number 2. This is just kind of a hard to find Miles cover. This was a variant on this particular book. The whole book sales was only like $34K. This back then jumped from a $15 to $20 book up to a $50 to $70 book because it's just hard to find. And it's still pretty hard to find. There's not very many listings. There's only one sale. That sale was for $20 in the last few months on eBay. So still a trap in the fact that people, the only sale is $20 compared to $50 to $70, but it is hard to find. So this, I don't know if this is becoming a ghost or people just aren't really listing it or what. But yeah, pretty hard to find, but not going for those kinds of values either. With that, our second to last cover is Iron Man number 17, the Joshua Sway variant. There was a bunch of Sway variants that, like, suddenly he was a hot artist there for a while back in the winter, and it seems to have died off a little bit, but this was another Sway variant that hit the list. This book jumped up to $15 to $20 based purely on this Riri Williams cover. There's nothing key about this book, just a cool Riri cover. So this $15, $20 book now is a $5 to $10 book, with 9.8 only going for 40 to 50. Thought this one might be worth it, only 15 to 20, but no, it also turned into a trap. Continuing our theme this week, a lot of traps. So yeah, as usual, I was a little more optimistic than I should have been when I was breaking down this list. This is one of the worst lists we've had, I'll be honest, in terms of books and book performance. Next, we got our last cover, and that is Deathstroke Incorporated number 6, the Alex Garner 1 in 25. Back then, raw copies of this 1 in 25 were going for 60 to 120, which was a really wide range, but it was kind of climbing, and it had jumped way up and then was kind of settling, so it was a little bit of where it was really going to settle. But you're talking at somewhere between 3 to 5 times ratio on those prices, which usually says they're going to be worth it. But previous performance on these Deathstroke things were already telling me back then probably not. This one dropped is now a $20 to $30 book, so right around ratio. An absolute trap, marginal dumpster fire, depending on what end of that 60 to 120 you bought this book on. Just not a great choice if you tried to chase this particular book. Next, we're going to move into a little bit of comic buzz. We have Miles Morales, Spider-Man number 13. This is the first appearance of Billy Morales as a baby. And basically, solicitations could come out for the storyline that we've had since, where she becomes a hero in an alternate timeline or alternate version of the universe or whatever. Back then, raw copies were up to $30. 9.8 hit 200. Now raw copies are still 25 to 50. 9.8 1 to 160. So 9.8s are down. Raws are around the same to slightly up. So I'm calling it steady and worth it, because most of the sales are on the raw side. But yeah, so we're not that far removed from this storyline actually happening. There is still some buzz about Billy. It's interesting. Usually the baby first appearance doesn't do all that well, and it's usually when they appear more as an adult. So we'll see there. But so far this book is doing okay. Next we have Twig number 1, or the Twig preview, excuse me. This was the Ash Can 1 per store that was limited edition that came out that had people just going crazy. When it first came out, it was like a $10, $20 book, and then $10 to $30 book, I guess. And then suddenly there was a sale of a raw one for $3.50, and then everybody started paying crazy prices for this. Raw copies were going for $1 to $180 back then. Now they still go $1 to $150, so they're down a little bit, but for the most part, I will say the only sale since August 9th of a raw copy or a non-signed slab copy was only $20, which is by far the cheapest one of these has went for. It's one sale. Maybe it just was an odd listing. It'd be interesting to watch and see what happens, but there hadn't been any sales for a while, and then this one sale for $20. 9.8 the only 9.8 sale recently that wasn't signed went for $300. I really didn't think this book would hold that well. I put it as steady because, on that the 150 range, but compared to 180, so it's an I'll be back. It's in the same kind of range, but just on the lower end of it. We'll see what happens with this going forward. That one sale is interesting. We'll see if that develops the new pattern, that it starts coming down significantly, or if it manages, that's just an outlier and it continues to sell for over 100. Next, we're going to move into a little bit of Star Wars stuff. And first up, we have Star Wars The High Republic Adventures Annual from 2021. This is the first appearance of several characters that were appearing in the books, like the novels as well as the comics. And we got the first appearance of Belle Zettifer, Loden Greystone, Porter Engle, and Indira. There were several others. Back then, raw copies were going for $20 to $35 based on people kind of specking on that we might get a High Republic project. I thought this was actually a decent spec because I feel like, having read the novels, I can't imagine them doing anything High Republic and not including Belle. I could be wrong on that front, but just where things have went, I would be very much surprised. Now raw copies are 15 to 30, so definitely I'll be back on this, down a little bit. 9.8, 85 to 115, which is also, I think, down from back then. We'll see if these characters get used or if we get a High Republic project anytime soon. But now it's definitely a little better time to look for this than it was back then. A little bit of the buzz is gone from the High Republic at the moment. And then I know that the next phase of the High Republic is going to be a different time period, although Porter Engle is an older Jedi that appears in this different time period, and I know he's getting a one-shot, so it might cause some renewed interest in this book here in another month or so. So we'll see. With that, we're going to move into Sony Spider-Man news, and we got Amazing Spider-Man number 307. This is the origin of the Chameleon and his origin of his powers. And he is Kraven's brother in the comics, and there was talk about him being in the Kraven movie is what was going on here. Raw copies of this book jumped up to $15. A 9.8 hit $2.15. Now it's a $1 to $15 book for the dollars for this book. 9.8 still $2 to $2.15, right in that same area, but definitely an I'll be back because the vast majority of the sales are those raw copies, and you can get them for pretty cheap. With that, we're going to move into a little bit of MCU's rumors, I guess, or, trailer buzz, that kind of stuff. First up, we have Doctor Strange, Sorcerer Supreme number 44. First appearance of the Sidorak, which we've gotten a bunch of different times, whether it be cage-related stuff or whatever. People jumped on this book several times and it's fallen back. Back then, basically, the people thought maybe there was a Sidorak in the trailer for Doctor Strange, which turned out wasn't actually named, but pretty much was the Sidorak, but then only appeared briefly in the Doctor Strange movie. But back then, it was $20 for a raw copy. 9.8 jumped up to 85. Now it's a $5 to $25 book, with most of the sales on the 5 to 15 side of that range, but a few 20, 25. Definitely still an I'll be back here in a book that was worth being patient on, as has been the case with the Sidorak at all times. Just avoid the news and you can get this book pretty cheap. Next, we have Balder the Brave, #1, the first solo series of for Balder. Balder is the half-brother of Loki and Thor. And this was completely no news here. This was just a Nick pick with Thor, the new Thor Love and Thunder coming out, that we might see Balder. So they put it on the list, even though it was averaging $3 for sales, just because there was a ton of sales after Nick put this on his list. This is one of those where I'm like, just confirmation bias of your spec pick. But now that it's been on people's radar, even though he didn't appear in the Thor Love and Thunder movie, it's still doing like 1 to 15. People are paying $10 now for this book fairly consistently, but also paying $1 plus shipping and, that kind of stuff. So it's all in this range. So technically this is up. On average, this is probably like an $8 book now instead of a $3 book, which is just kind of silly, but up and worth it is when it comes in. And this is obviously the only up book we're going to have this week. And that's just because it was so low to begin with, completely off people's radars. My guess is you can still find this in dollar bins if you really want it, and you want to do the digging. With that, our last book of the week is West Coast Avengers #56. This also had to do with Doctor Strange and people speculating. The trailer kind of was hinting that we might get the Dark Scarlet Witch. I guess we're farther enough away. I'll still say spoilers here, but yeah. So this is the first cover for Dark Scarlet Witch, and we did get, a sort of evil version of her in the movie. She was the bad guy. Raw copies were $30 back then. 9.8 hit 300, and they've come way back down. This turned into a trap. It's now a $5 to $15 book. 9.8, 75 to 150. Pretty typical performance as you move away from the movie. And we are several months away from the movie now, so no surprise that this one dropped back. So this week was really poor performing. We did have a book that went up this week, which we haven't had. We've had a lot of weeks with no books going up, but it is a book that went from a $3 average to like an $8 average. So pretty poor performance for this week. Probably one of the worst overall, like if you look at all these books, one of the worst weeks we've ever had in terms of just the overall quality of what we were looking at. But I want to thank you guys for watching anyway, and we will catch you next time.